So after public participation and before we debate and vote on the item on the agenda, Mr. Warwick Lamp from Election NZ will address the meeting and answer questions. So we will have some time for an informal period for questions from councillors. We also have got Catherine Waugh from Deloitte and Steve Kilpatrick, Managing Director of electionnewzealand.com here as well. So the next step, any conflicts of interest? No? And I'll now move to public participation, and I have got Jan Rivers, Nigel McNee, Yanita Stewart, Thomas Bryan and Daniel Spector in that order. So if we start with Jan, please. You can either come up here or you can sit at the end of the table as you prefer. Yeah, you come up to there if you like. And you have got 5 minutes.
Tēnā koutou katoa, called Jan Rivers, tōku ingoa. And welcome to me to the meeting, welcome you to the meeting. I'd like to talk about the proposed online voting material that's before the Council today, and I'd like to make a case very strongly that you postpone your decision. I've prepared some evidence, but because of a printer malfunction, I haven't got it available for you at the moment. But what I'd like to do is present to you some summary findings of the Australian Senate and Parliament report into the 2013 elections, which covered the introduction of online voting. But first of all, I'd just like to tell you a bit about myself. I have worked twice for the Council, both as the Records Manager and also as an IT Project Manager. I've also worked for Local Government New Zealand, initially in 2001 as the e-Local Government Coordinator and subsequently as the Knowledge Centre Manager. When I worked for as the e-Local Government Coordinator, I supervised a master's thesis on e-voting, which basically was, I found, hair-raising. But in terms of the levels of security required, in terms of the levels of technicality required, in terms of the rate of assurance required to present a reliable vote. But the other things I've been involved in recently are generally and broadly the area of the public good. So I've last year, before the election, worked with the St Andrew's Trust for the Study of Religion and Society to put on a conference. The topic of the conference was democracy, ethics and the public good. We invited speakers from organisations like Get Out the Vote, like Lumio, like Rock and Roll, and also the online platform Off the Fence, which was a platform put in place in order to enable young people to find out how their views matched the political parties. So I think that kind of establishes me as somebody who's very interested in improving the quality of voting in Wellington and in New Zealand more broadly. I decided that what I'd like to do is to take this fairly authoritative document, which is the review of the Council, review of the 2013 local government elections, and they provide a lot of evidence, and the overwhelming summary was that to implement online voting would be a catastrophic risk to democracy. Catastrophic risk to democracy. There's evidence from 13 or 14 countries. One of the countries was Holland, which could be regarded as the poster child of e-voting. In 2006, 99% of Dutch councils were using online voting, and people by and large were very happy with online voting. They thought it was great. It allowed them to vote without going to the polling booth. It allowed them to vote while they were overseas and even when they were living overseas. However, there was a technology review to demonstrate that there were some technical problems with the voting, and in the report which was issued afterwards, it became clear that the government and local government had been ignoring increasing numbers of identifiable problems. And subsequently, online voting was cancelled, and in 2008, the Dutch government passed legislation to prevent online voting in future. That's the same in Ireland. Ireland was a month away from implementing online voting. They spent 55 million euros on implementing online voting in 2011. A month before the elections, they had to cancel the technology solution and revert to a paper solution. And they too voted, I think, in 2011 to cancel online voting. In the States, where there has a long time been online voting, as the limitations to the system there have been shown, people have actually been relieved, and there's a very good public perception of old-fashioned paper voting, and people feel much more reassured than they have in the past. Even in Brazil and in India, where voting is electronic but is strictly limited to voting at the polling booth, there are still identifiable problems with online voting. The Australian reports proposed that there were some technology measures which could be used in order to support the speed of conduction and the reliability of conduction of elections. And they included things like having the electoral roll online at all of the polling stations so that people could be checked off, and that would prevent things like personation. Finally, I'd like to say that I believe that this is such an important issue, that it's entirely inappropriate that it should be discussed and decided at the timetable of national government rather than at your own timetable. And secondly, that it should be discussed at an emergency meeting which has had less than a week's notice, and that it hasn't been the subject of a public submissions process, as the decision in Porirua was. And finally, that it hasn't been the subject of a discussion at even a council subcommittee. I think that's, I'm a great fan of Wellington and what Wellington Council has been doing in many, many respects. But I think this is a very much it doesn't reflect that usual high quality of decision making and good quality democratic approach. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much, Jan. Very clear. Nigel. And again, you have a choice of table or podium. Sure.
Mayor Wade-Brown, councillors, thank you for this opportunity. I have a document here I would like to have tabled as part of this meeting. Thank you. I jointly run software development firm Opcode, which has $500,000 revenue and clients in New Zealand, the US and the UK. For one of our clients, we write an online system that contains the medical records of thousands of UK citizens. For several clients, our code and our infrastructure have been subject to penetration tests by security professionals. Given this experience, I have a lot to say on the subject of online voting. So as such, I was deeply surprised to read in the agenda for this meeting the note that no consultation is required for this decision. This is at odds with the DIA report on online voting, which says it is advisable to engage in meaningful public consultation both on the concept of online voting and the sort of system envisaged. If this meeting is it, then it's not enough. The benefits of online voting have not been shown. The DIA report itself concludes that there is no good evidence that online voting raises turnout. Yet in return, online voting opens the election up to massive new risks that don't apply to postal voting, as I'm sure you can see from your handout. Hacking is a risk. Consider the Ashley Madison hack, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Like the Death Star, one small hole destroyed the entire website. And there have been hundreds of hacks this year alone. The Walmart hack, the Sony hack, the US Government Office of Personnel Management hack, that's 20 million US government past, present and former employees, data gone. That includes fingerprints, that includes people with top secret clearances. I mean, they just go on. These are big names, and it's been like this for a long time. Phishing is a risk. That's PH phishing. That's emailing people links, for example, to fake websites that look real, like what happened to immigration.gov.nz recently. The danger there is that during election time, everybody in the city could be emailed, directing them to a fake site where they could be tricked into entering their credentials. Hackers could then cast real votes on behalf of the tricked people. Malware is also a risk and could be used to manipulate people's votes before they even arrive at the online voting system. It doesn't matter how perfect the system is, such manipulation can be done in undetectable ways. These problems are all unique to online voting, and they are caused by the structure of the internet as it exists today. That same structure also means these problems can be exploited by people anywhere in the world. This is not a problem we have with with postal voting. In 2004, internationally renowned security expert Bruce Schneier said, "Building a secure internet-based voting system is a very hard problem, harder than all the other computer security problems we've attempted and failed at. I believe that the risks to democracy are too great to attempt it." Nevertheless, a bunch of countries have tried, and the results have been poor. Out of the 12 studied in the DIA report, 6 have either discontinued their systems, or in the case of the Netherlands, have banned online voting entirely. And out of the remaining 6, none of them have provided good evidence of increased turnout. Now, I understand that Wellington wants to be seen as a high-tech, progressive city, but rushing into a politically binding rollout of online voting without adequate consultation does not send that message. Councillors have a responsibility to carefully tend our democratic functions, and it makes no sense to be guinea pigs in a system with such massive risks when no benefit has been shown. I urge you to vote no to this proposal, at least to allow community consultation to occur.
Thank you, Nigel. We've got a question from Councillor Marsh, if you're happy to answer a question.
Yes, I'm happy to answer all questions.
Thank you, Nigel. Why do people do this? Do they do it for profit or just because they can?
Online voting?
No, sorry.
Yes. Right. So what is the value of real power over an entire city, or real power over an entire country in the case of the general election? I don't know. You probably know better than me. But at some point, somebody is probably going to want to win an election more than they're going to want the certain amount of money it's going to cost them to implement the things that you see on that handout. I don't know. There are contracts, I'm sure, that are worth millions of dollars to somebody.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nigel. Janita? I hope I've pronounced your name right. Janita, is that right? Thank you. I had this feeling.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Janita Stewart. I did a thorough research of internet voting for local government at master's degree level at Vic University. I was sponsored by Local Government New Zealand, and I interviewed a number of Sorghum electoral working party members. I covered aspects of social, which got into, why people do and don't turn out for voting. I covered technical aspects, dealing with all the computer stuff and the hacking and how to get around that. The legal aspects, the law at the time would not allow internet voting, and the financial aspects. And I've also looked at other places around the world where they have done internet voting. And I looked at the objections that people raise for internet voting. And in my research, which, as you can see, is a rather large tome, addresses all of these. Now, as you very well know, you can't learn how to have a successful election by trial and error. It ends up on the front page of the Dawn Post. Elections must be done right the first time. Any error, will have those horrible consequences. This research was about having that successful election the first time. To boil down into a soundbite what this research does in 300 pages, it does say internet voting can be done. It can be done successfully. However, as Jan pointed out, and the other gentleman, I forgot his name, forgive me, you can't cut corners. If you feel you have to cut corners, then it's better to stay completely away from it. It's very expensive to make sure you cover everything and not cut corners, so if you're feeling like you can't put the expense into it, better stay away from it. So it's really expensive to set up initially. Some of the ongoing costs are far less expensive. So when I was dealing the technology side of it, I certainly interviewed the people at elections.com, Warwick Lamp and Steve Kilpatrick. It's actually nice to see them in person. I only dealt with them over the phone. And so I'm now happy to take your questions.
Thank you. If I may just ask a question, have you shared this with the Department of Internal Affairs, Janita?
I certainly interviewed them at the time that I did the research, and everybody that I interviewed was given a copy of the research at the end. So yes.
So they have this.
They have this,
thank you very
and
much.
Local Government New Zealand has it. Yes.
Okay, a question from Councillor Pannett and Councillor Foster, and that will probably take up the time.
Thank you so much for coming in. Look, we've had some reports basically showing countries that have tried it and failed. Can you name any countries, not just cities, where there has been absolute success? Because the information, the reports that we've got haven't really shown that yet.
Good question. The areas where internet voting has happened that were successful did not have the rigor that local government elections have to have. So yes, there have been some successful ones, but they didn't need the rigor that local government needs. So so it's not comparable. No, not there. No country. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Foster.
It's true that it is about a decade ago, but I have done some looking at, updating it, and there's not much different. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. But I'd be certainly willing to be a part of the consultation as we look through all the risks to try to cover, to make sure we don't cut corners, and so that it can be done right. But yes, I don't know how much that would be. I think that it can be done.
Thank you. No, we don't have more time on. Do we have more time on this one? Sorry? It has run out, Councillor Free. Thank you. Thank you very much, Janita. Very informative. And you're going to leave a copy of your, or we're going to have access to a copy of your research?
You certainly, I would suggest that the first step be that you try to get a copy from Local Government New Zealand, and if that fails, then I'm happy to accommodate.
Thank you, and I think Ms. Deborah House is going to take a note of that. Right, so councillors, sorry, and can we just, Councillor Free, this is a council meeting. If you could not talk across the table, that would be helpful. Now, Thomas Bryan, would you like to speak at the end of the table or up at the podium?
I'll take the end of the table.
Right, you're welcome. You're between Ray and Iona.
Oh, thanks, like Ray. Thank you very much, Your Worship and councillors, for the opportunity to speak this morning. My presentation is from a slightly different perspective, and I hope that you will indulge me for a minute if I could ask you to tell me who you are around the table for 30 seconds, just who you are, and I'll explain why.
Celia Wade Brown up at the podium, and then we'll start with Ray and go back round to Iona.
Thanks.
And use your mic, please.
Simon Marsh. Paul Eagle.
Thanks, Paul.
Nicola Young.
Malcolm Sparrow.
Sarah Free.
Mark Peck.
Joe Coughlin.
Andy Foster.
Justin Lester.
David Lee.
And Iona Pannett.
Thank you for indulging me. The reason I asked to do that is I guess you all have name tags, or people will recognise you by your faces. For me, I'm at a complete disadvantage, and so the only way I know who's in the room around the table is for you to tell me who's here. For those you haven't realised, I'm a blind person, and my whole life has been around advocacy and standing up for the rights for the disabled and those who do not really have a voice for themselves. So the fundamental, I guess, right for us all is to be able to cast a vote. I think many of us around the table, and I don't mean to say this to offend anyone, can remember the times when women never had a vote. Maori never had a vote. Those groups of people had to fight to have a vote. Disabled people for years lived in institutions. It was only their advocacy and their advocates and the changes in our attitudes enabled them to live in the community and not behind barred windows and doors. My point of view is that I too also would like to vote. At general elections, I can ask someone to do that for me. How many people would feel comfortable asking someone else to vote for them? You know, I look back at one of our former Prime Ministers whose family was a National Party and who was a Labour Prime Minister. Would have she felt comfortable asking her family to vote for different parties to what her family believed in? I don't think so. Blind people and the disabled community want to be able to cast their votes independently. They don't want someone else to do it for them. And so last general election, we had the opportunity to introduce dictation voting system, which meant that you could cast your vote independently to a degree. It didn't go all the way. Most of us would like to be able to go and cast a vote. But at the moment, for local elections, we get in the mail a huge booklet. Somebody has to sit down and read that information to us. We get voting papers, and someone then has to go through those voting papers with us. And sometimes the people who we ask to read information to us don't always read every single thing. Oh, they won't be interested in hearing about this, I'll just skip over that. You have no idea until someone else tells you, oh, did you read that bit about so-and-so? Oh, I never realised that. So we are very much in the hands of our friends, our families and other people. What the disabled community are asking for is the same right as everybody else, and that is to cast an independent vote. So we've heard comments around security. That is not an area that I am au fait with, but there are other experts who will probably tell us that with the right systems in place, security isn't an issue. I guess my plea is to say that disabled people would like a vote, give them the right to have an independent vote, and don't do what Christchurch did and say no. I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I've got a question first from Councillor Sarah Free.
Thank you, Thomas. I understand what you're saying, and I would like to see a system, ideally, that would allow you to have an independent vote. But this trial, as proposed, I understand you're going to get still your PIN numbers in 2 separate pieces of mailed out mailings. So how would that necessarily help a lot of disabled people?
Well, I'm involved in another voting process, and that has had those numbers, codes, either emailed or text to individuals. And so with the software and technology that's available for disabled people, they are able to read that information and participate. I mean, the organisation Blind Citizens New Zealand has done a lot of work with both local and national governments around New Zealand, raising these whole issues. I guess a factor that also that probably some councillors may not be aware of, that New Zealand has signed an agreement, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. While government has signed up to that, many of the articles there around employment, accessible, public transport, voting, all have implications for local government. And I'd probably urge that local governments around New Zealand actually start to read what the UN Convention that the government has signed up to may have implications for local councils.
Thank you, Thomas. I've got a question from Councillor Pannett and then from Councillor Lee, and I think that will probably take us to the end of that time.
Thank you, Thomas, and no argument from me about participation, of course. But I'm interested in 2 things, whether you've got any concern that no country has successfully used it, and 2, if the trial doesn't proceed, what can we do to help people with disabilities vote next year independently and freely?
Well, a good question. I guess probably the national government elections last time used a telephone dictation voting system. That certainly would go a long way to ensuring that people could cast a vote independently, ensuring that information that goes out about candidates, I mean, it gets circulated in a raft of languages, making sure that it's on websites that are fully accessible in Braille and in large print would also go a long way to making sure that people could be as informed as possible and being able to cast a vote.
Thank you, Thomas. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Thomas. You've already mentioned that it's a human right for access to participate in our electoral system. Do you also believe that the current postal voting system, which at the local government level, also has problems with people with impairments? Physical impairments.
I mean, I don't know how many even so-called, and I say so-called in the most friendliest way, sighted people have told me how they struggled to read the booklet that went out with the election packs on all the different candidates. The print was too small, the colour contrast was poor, and so, yeah, there are real issues around that information, and I think there are ways to actually make sure that's handled better.
And even posting the actual ballot form.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who are housebound. How do they get out to vote? They may have support people that come in and help with helping them around the house, doing their showering, etc. But those people aren't allowed to go off and run errands for people because how do they know there's not money in that envelope if it went missing? So there are lots of security issues for those staff who provide those services where they can't go off and do things. So those individuals who are housebound cannot get out to post their vote. And as we all know, many of us are getting to that stage, some probably sooner than others, where we will require a lot more support in the home.
Some of us feel committee room bound rather than house bound from time to time. Councillor, yes, there is another minute. Councillor Ritchie.
Just being a bit facetious, but haven't you heard of the Labour Party who brings people to the voting booth?
But this is a postal ballot.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. That was slightly facetious. Thank you very much. I think you've answered our questions very well. I'd now like to move to Daniel Spector on behalf of New Zealand Rise.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council, for hearing me. I've representing New Zealand RISE, which is the Association of New Zealand-owned IT companies. I've been in IT for decades myself, and would normally have nicely bullet-pointed notes to speak from, except I had a computer problem this morning. This happens to all of us in IT. We are not perfect people, but I'm trying to go off my public school US scrawl here, so bear with me, thank you. Also, my eyes are terrible. This is a major thing to consider, folks. And coming from NZ Rise, I'm not asking about the security, though I have my own concerns on that. What I'm asking about is the process. I found out about this meeting when I was contacted by a member yesterday, and thank you, Mayor, for getting me on the speaker list. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to know, you know, I do not know the incumbent organization. I voted here before. I'm sure you folks are great. My concern is the process here considering the, you know, you all know Grand Theft Auto. You're familiar with this program. This is a driving game where you run people over and you get points by killing things. But driving through Wellington is inherently different than driving a car online, and running an online election is inherently different than running a physical world election. There are different concerns and different capabilities, and I want to know, especially since I found out about this meeting yesterday, was a proper procurement process, an RFP process, followed to make sure that the company that is considered for this work understands and is deeply versed in the online security aspects of this. Now, I've heard a lot of people, well, I've read notes since last night, but a lot of the notes I saw, people are considering this. Well, we've got online banking. Online banking works fine. Online banking doesn't work fine. Banks have a budget for fraud, and their mitigation strategy for dealing with fraud is to throw money at it and keep it as quiet as possible. Online banking fraud in the UK, I couldn't find numbers for New Zealand, is up 71% just in the first 6 months of this year. This is an election. What is your mitigation strategy for fraud? Now, in computer security, if your hackers are really good, you won't ever know you've been hacked. That is the mark of the truly skilled. So what are your procedures to know if you've been penetrated when, in fact, it can happen and you won't know, as the US government didn't know for years about some of the hacks that they've been fallen victim to. I would love to see a proper RFP process that considers all the DIA's requirements for online voting, and everything gets addressed in full, and is very open and very public and very considered. So that's the start and end of my representation. My consideration is NZ Rise. I try to follow GETS very carefully, and I know Christchurch used Tenderlink, which is a Fairfax-owned tendering system, which I didn't follow because it's expensive. But I don't recall seeing anything on GETS for an RFP for this, and this is a critically important thing. So I would just like a public RFP process to make sure that all the big concerns and all the best players for this are in the room. Thank you very much.
Daniel, thank you very much. Are you happy to take a few questions?
Happy to.
Councillor Pannett.
Daniel, can I just ask you a question in a personal capacity, given you have expertise in IT?
Could you get closer to the mic?
Sorry, can I just ask you a question in a personal capacity, because you've got expertise in security? Sorry, are you catching me?
A little bit of security, and, well, I did some consulting with one security firm this year, and I did consult on election and electronic voting security in the US, yes.
Okay, so you're a very good person to talk to. So in your view, is it possible to actually create a system which will give a high degree of certainty to voters that the system will not be compromised, given that we've now had evidence that no country's actually implemented it successfully?
high degree is not absolute. A high degree of, I don't want a high degree of confidence in my election system. I want an absolute degree of confidence in my election system. I mean, you can have a high degree, but who sets high? What's the standard for high? The Australian Parliamentary Office said of their own considerations of online voting, what was the phrase? It would be catastrophically compromising of electoral integrity. That's heavy. Catastrophically compromising of electoral integrity. I know that my own home country, the US, has looked at this and said, oh gosh, no, this is too dangerous. I know that the Pentagon is not allowing a lot of online activity. I know that the biggest risk to the system, there are many points, but certainly the devices that the users themselves have are the biggest risk point.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, then Councillor Coghlan.
Daniel, you mentioned earlier that the banking system is widely used, online banking, and that it is open to fraud. But do we still keep on using it?
Well, since the bank absorbs the costs, absolutely. I don't get hit if the bank gets defrauded. Okay, in Europe, there are, I can go into details on the number of scams. I'm current on this topic. But if fraud happens, and fraud happens all the time, as I said, up 71% just in the first half of this year in the UK, the bank pays it out. You can't pay out broken faith in an election system. Once faith is compromised, the system is compromised.
Okay, if we look at, say, email system. Most of us have an email system.
Does yours work? Does
I
your
do.
email system?
Yeah. But do we look at the benefit over the cost or the risk?
I think that it's a zero-sum game. If people don't have faith in the voting system, people don't have faith in the government.
Okay.
That you can't have. There's no such thing as a little bit pregnant.
I think this is probably not an angle to pursue right at the moment. I'd like to move to Councillor Lee and then, sorry.
We have two of them?
Coghlan. I've got just a question, Daniel.
Certainly.
We have STV at the moment, which is quite a complex calculation system that is quite difficult to replicate exactly what goes on in a computer. You couldn't have a room full of people very easily replicating that. What's to say that at the moment a computer that is actually running the STV calculations is not compromised?
Absolutely nothing. Now, that's an important question. There are lots of places that an election can be compromised, and in the counting system itself is the most dangerous. If you look at traditional voting systems, all election fraud has to happen mostly retail. You have to have a bunch of people in on it as a team. But one hacker can compromise an election counting system very well, so you need extensive auditing. You should always have open source computer code for your election counting system so the code itself can be inspected by the public. Now, this doesn't compromise any company's intellectual property. It just backs up election security. The company owns the property, the company is running the elections, nobody's going to copy their code and compete with them running local elections. You only have one set. Anybody else?
Yes, Councillor Ritchie.
Closer to the microphone, please.
Yes. Thank you for... I can stand up if you want. I don't know whether that will help.
It helps, thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for offering your expertise today, even though you've only got 3 or 5 minutes, or 10, or whatever it is. It's still not sufficient. Oh, sorry, that's not a question. I would like to ask each of the submitters, and in fact I'd like to ask the public, and I have tried to ask the public through IT actually. I noticed you brought pencil and paper today, which is admirable and reliable, reasonably.
And a computer.
Oh, you've got some IT. I don't think that we can address this question today, but I'm not clean. I'm going to ask the officers later. What do you consider what do you think about going back to a one-day booth process event where people can celebrate democracy and actually go or be taken, if need be, to locally based booths with pencil and paper, or a combination of perhaps what we have now and a booth? Nothing has shown us to date with postal voting that there is an increase in participation.
Councillor.
I think that voting booths are great, except for the handicapped, and we should also include braille ballots. The telephone system that Thomas referred to, that I believe is either in use or under consideration in Australia, sounds like it is a very good solution. I used to work in stuff around voting and elections. I'm excited about elections. I want everybody to vote, not mandatorily, but people to be excited and engaged with the process. Nothing I've seen says that online voting increases that engagement, but I think a national holiday, yeah, that would be increasing the engagement, certainly.
If people chose to spend it in the voting booth. Thank you, Daniel, very much. I've got the last public participant. I'd like to invite Mayor Nick Leggett to address us. Nick Leggett's been on the Working Party and has got some clear information and views he'd like to share. Thank you, Nick.
Well, kia ora tātou, and thank you for indulging me this morning briefly. Mayor Wade Brown is absolutely right. I was on the DIA Working Party, and I ask you today respectfully to join your neighbour Purirua in this e-voting trial. We consulted 3 years ago on e-voting as a trial. It was endorsed by our community at our long-term plan, and we hope that the government will will support when they get to push the button towards the end of the year. They will support the trial for the councils that have chosen to opt in. I mean, I've been interested to listen to the discussion today, people talking about democracy and people's right to the franchise and increasing engagement. Look, those things, they're really easy words to use, but actually they've got to be reinforced by action. And this opportunity that Wellington City Council has today is about widening the possibility for Wellington residents to engage. Facebook has increased engagement. If we think about people's ability to say what they want and talk to their elected representatives, because a whole generation of us are now wedded to our phones. We don't interact with mailboxes. In parts of Purirua, mailboxes have been taken out in some of the low-income areas. So how are people actually going to get to the ballot box or get their papers to the ballot box in a postal election? I don't think people have particular faith and engagement in our current system with only a 40% turnout across much of the Wellington region. We've heard a lot about overseas examples. Estonia is a really good example, another small country where they've trialled and they've pushed it through, and they've actually beginning to see an incremental increase in the turnout. And this discussion about booth voting, look, it's Stone Age with respect. The general election last year, 25% of New Zealanders voted before the day. We're not going back. The last booth voting for local government in New Zealand was Hutt City in 1992. The turnout was 25%, the lowest in the country. If we think about our current current voting system for postal voting, absolutely open to manipulation. People often sort of paper over the cracks and where there have been instances of real problems. In the Eastern Ward in Purirua in 1995, the ballot papers were printed saying that people had 6 votes for their local councillors when there were only 5 seats. Nothing was done to rectify that. A third of the votes were declared informal, and the election went on and the council were elected as normal. This stuff happens in our current system. So nothing is foolproof, but we have to be confident, and the government, as I've said, they are the last deciders of this. They actually, they're the ones that are going to push the button. They have to be confident, and I think I've seen the work that DIA have done with a lot of good advice from election providers. Hundreds of elections have been run, e-voting elections have been run in New Zealand to date, probably 150 to 200 this year. This happens already. It's time for us to actually meet technology and meet where our communities are at and widen people's opportunity to participate. I know I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce, coincidentally today, the Wellington Chamber of Commerce, at a breakfast. 87.6% of Wellington businesses support the trial, as surveyed by the Chamber Biz Confidence Survey. And the other point before I finish, because I don't want to say too much, put you off, this prevents, e-voting actually prevents informal votes with STV. Which I think will be a particular concern, not so much in Wellington, where most elections are actually STV, but in areas where there's a first past the post council and an STV health board, we find that there are massive informal votes. So there are so many good reasons for us to trial this. This is just about having a chance, testing. Let's see how it goes. And that might be too big a risk for some of you. But what I say is, I think democracy, we've got to keep pushing outwards and keep trying to encourage and improve the number of people that take part, because 40% is woeful, in my view, in terms of turnout in our region.
Are you happy to take a few questions?
Yes, yeah, people.
Thank you. I've got at least 4, Councillor Sparrow, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Lester, Councillor Panek and myself, so if we've got time. So Councillor Sparrow.
Thank you, Mayor Leggett. We heard earlier that this can be done successfully, but you can't cut corners. Are you reasonably confident that the necessary money will be spent on the initial trial to ensure that this is set up as secure as it possibly can be?
I trust, as the final decision maker, I trust DIA and the government. They have run an incredibly robust process. They've not only engaged experts in technology and looked at overseas evidence, they've got people that actually run our election systems and run e-voting in New Zealand at the moment. So, if it was to be on my head alone, I'd say, I'd be a little bit more nervous about this. But the point is, we want to be in it together and we want to be backed up by government. This trial gives us the opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Ritchie.
Sorry for calling your idea Stone Age, by the way.
Would you like to turn your microphone on so we can all hear?
You see, absolutely, it's a question. First of all, that's an easy attack. Secondly,
no, there was some evidence there.
Yeah. Was the parliamentary election done by who? And what was the percentage turnout?
The point that I was making was not that booth voting was staged, but booth voting alone is staged. The point is that people had 7 days advance voting, and 25% of New Zealanders who voted chose to exercise that right. That was a positive.
What was the percentage
Councillor, I have got 3 other people to ask questions.
Google
Thank
it.
you, Councillor. Sorry, Mayor.
You should know.
Well, why should I know more than you?
Mayor Leggett,
Sorry.
I'm sure. Why should that's another good question. Thank you. We have now got Councillor Lester.
Thank you very much, Nick, for coming and for your explanation so far today. As you're part of the
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
No, Councillor Ritchie, that is not appropriate to interrupt another councillor.
As you're part of the online working party, the question of audit, so after the votes have been cast and redressed and then picking up mistakes, could you please explain to us what was discussed and what the process might look like to give councillors some assurance that if something goes wrong, it can be picked up?
Yeah. I can comment on what the working party looked at. I can't comment on what the government has finally decided to do, but I suppose the point that gave me some confidence was that once an electronic vote had been cast, it was taken offline. And there were various options discussed about. You could even print the votes, so you've got a paper trail. I don't know if this is going to eventuate, but you can, once the vote is cast and it's taken offline, it can't be hacked at that point, and it's very measurable and very auditable. Now, that to me, said people are thinking about this. It's actually doesn't matter what happens to the vote, but if people have the opportunity to cast electronically, it can be safeguarded beyond that point. And I think that's the bit that gave me some confidence.
Thank you, Nick. Next question, Councillor Panek.
Thank you, Nick, for coming in. Can you just explain to me why you think New Zealand can do better than any other country in the world, given there's been so many failures? And the other thing is, did the Working Party look about evidence about turnout? Because we've had lots of evidence that it doesn't do anything, so that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To answer your second question first, as I said, this is not a silver bullet for turnout, but I worry that turnout is on a slippery slope downwards if we don't widen the ability for people to participate, especially in a mode that they feel more comfortable and interact with, on a daily basis. So these overseas examples, really good question. If you were comparing apples with apples, I would say, yeah, it's a disaster, don't go anywhere near it. But the point is, the overseas examples are not. Often politicians are responsible for driving these trials, and of course politicians like status quo because it's what elected them into the position. And so you often see politicians don't take these kind of risks with voting. You think about changing an electoral system or cutting the number of councillors, you often have to go to the local government commission to get that because people feel, well, no, we didn't either, but I'm just saying often, I'm not saying all. So like, for instance, one of the examples that we looked at was where in the United States for university election they'd run e-voting, which was people printed off their vote, hand wrote it, scanned it and sent it back, and it was somehow hacked because it was a university and they didn't have particularly strong defence. To me, that's not e-voting, but that's held up as one of the examples of where e-voting doesn't work. And we've got to make sure the comparisons are real, and Estonia is the very best comparison, and they have made it work. Now, admittedly, they're only a country of 1.5 million people, but this takes will, it takes guts, and all I'm saying is that actually it would be great for Wellington to demonstrate the will to join the trial.
Thank you very much, Mayor Leggett. I just had two questions. One is that when people proposed STV, there were concerns from others that it was less transparent because there were computers involved to count it. Yes. And of course, yourself, you being on the District Health Board, do you think that some of those reservations are similar to people's reservations about online voting?
I do think that. As a proponent of STV, obviously, I've been very pleased to see that it worked very effectively in the councils or the cities that were brave enough to choose it. I think a better example on this, Your Worship, is where early processing of votes was mooted several elections ago in New Zealand, and people screamed. They said this is where the returning officer scans the votes by a computer or by a scanner, via a scanner, as they come in. They're not all. They used to be counted on the day, but they're scanned as they come in. Now, people screamed the roof down. They really were terrified that this was going to be open to a manipulation, that we'd know what the result was going to be early. As soon as it happened once, never a problem. So there is always nervousness, and it's good to be nervous, it's good to ask questions, but you've got to keep moving forward, and we have that opportunity.
Thank you very much. We're out of time now, so I will. You're welcome to stay, of course, as is everybody else. I'd now like to move. First, we'll have the Chief Executive say a few words about the paper, and then we'll move to Warwick and Deborah, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I just want to be clear, as the Mayor Porero said, this is a national pilot, and a decision will not be made on the pilot until the end of the year. At this point, we don't know whether what that decision is going to be, whether the government will proceed, and even if we express an interest, we don't know whether we'll end up on that pilot list. Ultimately, any decision on changing the voting system at local body elections is a matter for the government, not the council. Totally understand lots of the points made by public participants earlier. If there is a proposal to change the local body election system, then the government will need to go through a consultation process and explore all of the issues that were raised earlier. I think it's really important to remember that. This issue came up quite late in the long-term planning process, and we did have concerns as officers, to be honest, about it, because you'd largely made most of your decisions about what was going to be in the long-term plan, and there wasn't much room for manoeuvre financially. And at the time, we were unclear what the cost of this pilot was going to be. We're clearer now, but we were unclear at that time. And to be honest, we had a lot on our plate. The Mayor and Deputy Mayor were keen to be part of the pilot. We discussed that and we decided on a no-commitment basis to express an interest. Now we're in a situation where local government in New Zealand want formal confirmation ahead of the government's consideration of the pilot that this council is either in or out and that we do have the financial cover. That's why we've got today's meeting. There are, of course, very good reasons for considering new forms of voting, as the Mayor of Pororo was saying earlier. Currently, councillors have a relatively weak mandate. We've only got 4 out of 10 people voting in the elections, and those numbers are going the wrong way at the moment. Secondly, Wellingtonians are tech savvy. There's a lot of internet literate people in the city, far more than other cities around the country. So it's a good place to do a trial. And thirdly, we do keep calling ourselves a smart capital, and this is one way to demonstrate that. But let's be clear, officers haven't made a decision on that. That's the purpose of this meeting. Is it yes or no? The question is being raised, why no consultation? This is a pilot. It's about testing the issues, and ultimately the government will make a decision on the voting system. They are the proper body to go through a thorough consultation exercise. I've also been asked, did ELT consider this matter? The paper before you was signed off by the Acting Director of Governance, and do remember, I'm your Chief Executive. You have a separately appointed elections officer. And finally, it's been suggested, could you lay the matter on the table? My strong advice is say yes or no, not maybe. We need a clear decision. If you're laying it on the table for further work, how can we actually take part in the pilot?
Thank you. I'll have all of the staff present before we take any questions. So who's going to go next? Warwick, great.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to come and present to you this morning. As your recently appointed electoral officer, this is the first time that many of you have had the opportunity to meet me. So I think it's probably appropriate that I just give you a little bit of history about who I am and where we've come from to this point. As Madam Mayor said earlier on, with me today is Steve Kilpatrick, the Managing Director of Elections.com, and Catherine Waugh from Deloitte. Catherine is our IT consultant, security expert, and she can answer any of the really technical questions about online voting if need be. But as far as elections go, I'm an electoral officer for councils. In the non-council world, I'm known as a returning officer, which probably makes me one of the most boring people on the planet. But boring is good when it comes to voting systems and online voting. Being a returning officer, I deal in fact. I don't deal in rhetoric, perception, supposition, what may be. I deal in facts and risk. And my job is risk identification, risk mitigation with all the elections and all the clients that I have. I deal with risk management plans every day. I deal with how to vote every day. Voting systems, voting methods, postal voting, online voting, booth voting. Voting patterns, voting behaviour, how people vote. That is core business to what I do. I do it all the time. So I think that puts me in a position of, for want of a better word, being an expert on voting and how all that works. So when it comes to council elections, I understand the issues involved in how voting works, how STV works, how FPP works, how STV and FPP works combined. I understand how online voting fits in with that because in my environment, we've been doing online voting in New Zealand for 15 years. This is not new technology. It is core business to us. I've carried out in excess of 2,000 elections since 2000. 80% of those have had an online component. We do 150 elections in New Zealand a year. The only elections that we don't have online voting for are local government elections. Many of those elections are online only. Many of them are postal and online combined. And so, and there are some factors to take into account when you're dealing with a postal and online voting election combined. To give you some examples, the Law Society, Chartered Accountants, New Zealand Teachers Council, many energy trusts, Victoria University, doing an online election for Victoria University today, Fonterra, most of the agricultural organisations, lots of iwi. All of these organisations use online voting every day. And so the key point from that is that it is not new technology. It is a mature environment where we manage the risk and identify the risk every day. To back up Brian's comments before about blind citizens, I'm currently in discussions with the Muscular Dystrophy Association, who their members have great difficulty in accessing the postal voting system, and they're wanting to move to an online way of doing things.
Take all the questions when all of the staff members have finished.
To backfill on some fact, there are 7 councils that have so far decided to put their hand up for this trial next year. Those councils are Pororua City, Selwyn, Rotorua, Matamatapiako, Masterton, Whanganui and Palmerston North City. So those councils have decided in the last 3 weeks to commit to online voting to go forward for Cabinet to eventually make that decision. 3 councils yet to go: Wellington City today, Marlborough District tomorrow, Dunedin City on Monday. I would like to address a couple of comments that were made in some of the submissions earlier on. There was a lot of discussion about comments about online banking and the concerns that the online banking world throws up. The issue with online banking is that online banking is a PIN and a password that you use continually. You use it all the time, it's the same PIN and pass. You know what we're all like, we hardly ever change our online banking PIN. It's used all the time. That is completely different to how online voting works. Online voting is a one-time PIN, a one-time event where you're sent your PIN and pass in the post, you take that PIN and pass, go to the online voting site and log in. You vote 5-10 minutes online. Once you've used that PIN, it then can't be used again. So if someone does get access to it, hacks it, and goes to vote online, they can't. The system stops them because it says they've already voted. So in that respect, it's not the same as online banking. Sure, some of the security is similar infrastructure, but the mechanics of how you use the PIN and pass is not. And that is a key difference. In Wellington City's case, me and Nick mentioned that most of the city is all STV. And online voting helps with STV because it auto numbers, you can't get the sequences wrong, and so in that respect it will help reduce the number of informals. And particularly in the Northern Ward case here in Wellington, where there is the Hatmana Charitable Trust, which is FPP. It's the only ward in Wellington City that will have a component of FPP and STV. Tick the box, FPP, rank the numbers, STV. In our other councils, there's quite a bit of confusion that happens in that respect. There is about 5% nationally of people who tick STV instead of ranking it. So online voting in those cases gets rid of that because it makes sure that you capture the vote correctly. So I guess, as I said before, the key point is risk mitigation, risk identification, and that is what, as an electoral officer, I spend a significant part of my time doing, in identifying the risks of new systems and putting those in place with existing systems to ensure that we mitigate against any possible risk. Happy to take questions.
I've got a couple. Was there any other staff members? Maybe we could have Catherine and Steve come down to the front so that you're ready if there are any questions that need to be directed in your way. Thank you. Maybe Paul, grab this chair, Deb, so they've got. Thank you. Or that one. Come on. Was there anything either of you wish to add before we go to questions? No. Okay. So I have got Councillor Ritchie, Pannett and Free at the moment. Councillor Foster. And
Madam Mayor, do you want us to stand up? Or?
Given it's a slightly informal part, because we don't normally have questions at council, you don't need to, but thank you for asking, Councillor.
Thank you. Look, it's a rather fundamental question in relation to the report and to the Chief Executive's presentation. The report, which is quite thin, in all sorts of ways, which will be debated later, says agree to confirm online voting trial, and the CEO talked about a pilot for the 2016 local election. Now, I know that many of my colleagues and the public have taken that to mean that there will be a binding trial or pilot for the 2016 local election. The CEO has indicated that this is a pilot and referred to the end of 2015 and then a decision. So my question is, what is it that we are being recommended to vote on, please?
Well, the government are going to make a decision at the end of the year about whether they have an online voting element in the 2016 local elections. Wellington City Council makes a decision today whether it wants to be considered for inclusion in that.
Thank you. Councillor Pannett.
Be sure that we are not being asked to approve a binding voting process, e-voting process for the 2016 local elections, which is what some people had taken out of this.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Councillor Pannett.
Thank you very much for all coming along today. So I've asked questions of submitters and now I'd like to hear from you over them, but also I do have a question about DIA requirements, so I hope you'll be able to answer that. The first question, and with the greatest respect to our small country, is why is there a feeling that we can do better where everyone else has failed, including Estonia? Apparently they've had some issues as well. Why, and will we have the resources, because as you heard one of the submitters say, you can't cut corners. So how much money are we going to throw at this to make sure that we get it right to achieve the benefits which are being claimed?
Sure. There are some huge fundamental differences in the way that online voting has been used elsewhere around the world than what it is here in New Zealand. The difference is that in the countries that you've mentioned, they have used online voting in conjunction with polling booth voting. They don't have and haven't used postal voting in the same manner that we have used postal voting for council elections for the last 25 years. And so in that respect, it is a different environment that we have here in New Zealand, which makes it different and easier for us to integrate online voting in that because of the equivalency that we can gain between the way people vote by post and the way people vote online.
So really the question is how can we guarantee security when the US defence can't? Why have we got the resources that they haven't? And I mean, there's a whole lot of other Western countries that haven't been able to do this, so...
It's not a case of being in a position where we can guarantee the security of it. With any system, any process, there is always risk. And our job as electoral officers is to identify that risk and put practices and processes and systems in place to mitigate where possible. For example, there are just as many risks with the postal voting system as there are in an online voting environment. With postal voting, as a really good example, it would be possible for a plane carrying the votes to tip over in the sea and all those votes be lost, as happened 10 years ago with New Zealand Post. And so, you know, all those things, you can't stop them from happening. It's a case of identifying what those risks are and having procedures and resources and systems in place to mitigate them.
Next question
Thank you.
follows on nicely.
One more?
Yeah, no, this is really important because we had someone who was a software engineer email us late last night. He is claiming, and I'd like a response, is that the DA requirements for online voting are a bare minimum and don't include important mitigation strategies such as open source code and bug bounties, which I just found out about last night. It's very interesting. It is concerning to hear that some of these requirements have already been waived. The DAA requirements are silent regarding mitigating risks in people's personal and computing devices. Is this true? Because if it is true, doesn't this completely undermine the fact that we can give a very high degree of security?
I think you're entering into debate about the implications.
Yeah, but is that true? Is that true? That's what DIA has done?
I can answer that question, and Catherine and Steve will make a couple of comments as well. But those concerns that were raised are nothing new, and that particular person who raised them, along with some other IT professionals, were consulted by DIA as part of their process and had their input into the DIA guidelines. DIA listened to their concerns, took their comments on board, and then proceeded to come up with the guidelines that mitigated the concerns that they have raised. So their input has been taken account of and listened to. Catherine and Steve, you got some comments to add on that?
Maybe if I could.
You need to come near the microphone. Yep, thank you.
Can everyone hear me now? Just first of all, and I'll be very quick about an introduction about me. My name's Catherine Moore. I am a partner at Deloitte. I think that's been disclosed already. I've been in the IT industry about 25 years. What I do every single day is advise clients on how to manage technology risk. Those are with clients in banking, clients like Steve, but also clients overseas as well as in New Zealand. So the point's been made already, and I've heard a number of quite informed views on technology. I've also heard some other views which perhaps, you know, we're quoting things that happened 10 years ago. I think any technologist in the room would recognise that, you know, technology has moved on in 10 years exponentially across the board. It continues to move on. Really, this is about risk. It is about risk management. It's about identifying the processes in place to manage that risk. Now, if we were just looking at the DIA requirements, that would be insufficient. I absolutely agree with whomever said it, that they are a minimum. However, what we've looked at when we've been looking at these systems are global requirements. Every single day we're looking at changes to technology, changes to how risk is being managed, and this is an ongoing thing for every organisation in New Zealand, not just people who are providing voting systems, not just banks, not just organisations who deliver services to consumers or to citizens. It actually affects all of us. So every single day we're thinking about what those risks are, we're helping organisations manage those risks, and you know, it isn't a set and forget process. That has to be done continually. And so what we've been working on is how do we actually create a sustainable mechanism for continuing to evaluate, understand and test those controls that are in place to manage risk over the period of time that the election is in place, but plus ongoing and as things change both technically and from a usage perspective as well.
And can I just ask one last question, which is what evidence have you seen that shows that e-voting increases participation given the problems that other countries have had? Thank you.
As Mayor Nick said, online voting is not a silver bullet to participation. there are a percentage of the voting populace who will switch from postal to online. So what it does is provide an alternative method. But for the many clients that we work with, we see an increase in participation when it is coupled with a strong voter education and voter participation program, particularly around the introduction of online voting. In a case here, it's going to be new. The media are going to be interested in it. It's going to be well publicised, and if the council has a strong comms plan in place behind that, I'm confident that there will be an increase in the participation.
Councillors, I will really stick to having one go at questions rather than going back, otherwise we will never get to the vote. What I'm going to do now is break till 1:45 for morning tea. Thank you, and I hope that you'll be able to stay. Who's asking questions? Councillor Free. Unless you've managed to... Thank you, Councillor Foster, for asking your question in the break.
Given that I understand that Auckland Council is not able to take part because there'll be too many votes at stake, I've seen that quote somewhere, what sort of auditing are you planning to do post this process if it does go ahead? What sort of transparency will there be about your analysis of whether there have been any flaws in the system, how well it's worked, whether the percentage of votes, for example, cast electronically has reflected the same sort of trends as, or expected trends as might be predicted from non-electronic votes? I mean, what safeguards are you building into this process?
Sure. Let's just stick to the facts. Auckland Council were not permitted to be part of the trial, not because there's too many votes at stake, because simply the Act doesn't allow a subset of an election to occur rather than the whole election, because there was some talk about Auckland wanting to do one local board, but the Act says that it has to be an all or nothing approach to an election. So simply when you put those numbers into perspective, there's 1 million people in Auckland, and if you're then doing a trial of 1 million people, it's not a trial, it's a rollout. And so you have to balance it up with the size. But as far as mitigation goes and analysis of voting, what it allows us to do in our reconciliation process before we announce the results are to take the online votes and the postal votes into the same database and do an analysis of those votes to see if the patterns are consistent, and if there was some material differences. When we looked at that, then we would take a closer look and see if there was any issues. But our procedures are such that we can identify those things as they occur and take action accordingly. Catherine and Steve can add to that.
That's pretty much what I was going to say.
Okay, all right, perhaps not.
I would really like to move to the voting. You have had a number of days to ask questions of officers who have then passed some of them on. I've got Councillor Foster. No, Councillor Foster's asked his question. Councillor Lester, then Councillor Eagle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you all for attending and answering our questions. This one relates to the census, and I know it's not strictly within the scope of the work that you do, but you might have some experience in dealing with it. So are you aware that the next census in 2018 is going to be on an online first basis, so that it will be conducted online but with a backup through the collecting system?
I wasn't aware of that, but that's a great progression.
Okay. Either of the other two of you had experience in the census? Yes? Okay.
But I would say that, I think one of the things that we've...
Sorry, could you come out?
Sorry.
It's not the best acoustics in here.
We've talked a lot about technology today, and I think I would just point out that the technology systems that are be using for the online voting trial, potentially those online systems that are being built at the moment, they're quite different from what Stats use. So I think we just need to be careful about making comparisons with what's being proposed here from a technology perspective with things like what happens in Ashley Madison or Defence in the US.
Yes, thank you. It's more, I guess the issue is around, you haven't heard any questions around the robustness of the technology. Have the same concerns been expressed? I mean, a trial was rolled out in 2013 and people filling out the census form had the option. They could either do it in hard copy form or online, and 65% of people actually chose to do it online rather than in hard copy format.
Let me explain the process that publicly available systems need to go through prior to them being accredited for service in New Zealand. So all of these systems require risk assessments. They require things, and I'm sure you've heard this term used before, penetration tests. They require, and that's where people need to break into or try to break into the systems. They require vulnerability assessments. Where are the weaknesses? Where are the risks? How are those risks mitigated? How are those risks tested? I would suggest, and I am not aware of what's happening in stats around this, but I know that if they're proposing that, that process will need to be followed, and that is exactly the same process as we've followed with the systems or the system that's proposed for the online election trial.
Right, thank you. And you cited numerous examples in New Zealand, and I guess the census is another example of that. And all of the instances where online voting has taken place through the organisations you've been involved in, has there been a single instance of fraud or of electoral fraud in any of those, which has been identified in subsequent audits?
There haven't been any instances of hacking or penetration per se. What we sometimes get is cases where people might vote by post and online at the same time, and each client is different. Some clients have a rule that says post takes precedence or online takes precedence. In the council environment, if that occurs, the Act is clear and says that if anybody votes by both methods, then their vote is invalid. And so in this case, we will go to strong links to make that clear on the online voting site and on the postal piece of paper, that if people vote by more than one method, then their vote will be invalid.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the last on my list for questions, Councillor Eagle.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, thank you for coming in. I just need to get this right. So the system that will be used to run this, even in the trial or the pilot, whatever we're calling it, that hasn't been built yet?
Well, it's a bit of a long story. The application that we use for online voting has been in place for 15 years.
Yep.
The back-end security and infrastructure required for a public election is currently being developed. So we have a system in place now that does the front end, captures all the votes. That system is there, but the infrastructure and the security behind it is currently being designed, developed and tested.
Okay, so on the testing, you let hackers and you sort of stress test it, you do what you do to get it up to the scoped level of acceptability.
Steve can answer that better than me.
Thanks. Good morning. Just in response to that, what we do with any of our local government elections, because it is such a busy time for us, even if it's postal voting, we do build processing centres specifically for that purpose, and that won't be any different for the online voting application either. What Warwick is saying is quite right in that the application software, so the front end that a voter will be presented with will be the same front end that a voter is presented with today at any of the elections we happen to be running. What will be different though is the security and infrastructure and the data centre behind that application. As you can imagine, and we've heard by one of the speakers already this morning that you don't cut corners, and that those things are pretty expensive beasts to run. So we don't run it more than we need to. So we will certainly be putting that in place, assuming this goes ahead, next year in time for plenty of stress testing, plenty of auditing, and what have you, and final compliance testing before it goes live.
Okay.
One very quick thing on that. I'd just like to add to that part of the one thing you've got to recognise is that the security over the system will change constantly as what happens in the environment changes. This isn't, as I said before, about building something and then keeping on using the same thing for 10 years. What we've been doing is working with Steve to build a program of work that evaluates and tests the security of these systems and continues to provide more robust solutions over time. So it, comparing it to a static environment that was perhaps built 10 years ago, say in some of the other elections that have been mentioned, I don't think is a relevant comparison.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'd like to thank Warwick, Catherine and Steve. And you're welcome to stay. I'm sure you'll be interested to. I'm not standing up there. You don't just go and sit down and relax while you enjoy our more informed debate now. I'd like to call on the portfolio leader governance and our Deputy Mayor to introduce this report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Now, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the public participants earlier and the issues that they've raised. They raised some valid points, and in particular, the most valid one, and the subject of much discussion today, is online voting completely secure? Well, what we've heard from all parties, regardless of where you sit on the spectrum, is, well, no, it's not. It's not. If someone is of a mind and has the expertise and also the criminal intent that they want to commit electoral fraud and hack into the system, well, they could. But there's a follow-up question that you need to ask in response to this as well. What is the probability of any vulnerabilities being exploited? Who is likely to do so, and why? And I would suggest that in the context of a local body election, as much as it's important to me that the Northern Ward candidates, Councillors Sparrow, myself and Richie, do our very best to get elected again, that for an international hacker, it's not particularly relevant. If it's relevant for someone in New Zealand who wants to hack into the system, then they have to have the appropriate criminal intent to do so, and they'll be subjected to the risk of imprisonment if they're caught, if they think they might be able to get away with it. This also applies to all aspects of our daily life, if we're to take analogies a little bit further, around risks and probabilities of something occurring. The example of online banking has been used extensively. Sure, it's quite different, but it exists. Credit card transactions, phishing PH, cloud computing, accounting, our email servers, for example. And we can apply the same logic to any action we decide to undertake on a daily basis. Do I jump into a car and drive into the work in the morning, or am I going to risk something happening or going wrong? Do I cycle? The likelihood increases. Or even walk. Again, there is a risk of something going wrong or an accident taking place. Are we better off to not do anything about it and to stay at home in bed? Well, actually, probably shouldn't stay at home, because ACC statistics indicate that slip, trips and falls are the most likely cause of any accident anywhere. So should we not do something because there's a risk of something going wrong? Well, I say no. What is the probability? And if it's so low, then can we proceed? You've also got to compare the offering around online voting with the status quo. Now let's be frank about this. We are comparing this to the current postal vote system. A current postal vote system has its own risks, but then is also fed into a computer software-based system at the end, which can also be hacked if someone has a desire to do so. Now, the postal vote system, I was out one morning delivering brochures, as you do as a local body candidate, to the Northern Ward households, and I happened to do so just after the postie had been round delivering the enrolment forms and the voting lists also. What staggered me was how easy it would be, not only that it was raining, so most of them were wet and flopping and hanging out of the letterboxes, how easy it would be for someone, if they were of a mind to go around and take out all of those, collect them up and try and vote if they wanted to. But then you'd say, oh, well, okay, but I'd know if I didn't get my voting forms. Well, a smarter criminal might then decide, I'll take around the marked roll, I'll get all of the addresses that haven't voted in the past, they probably don't care, won't notice if they don't receive the forms themselves, and I can vote on their behalf. How robust is the system? It's not terribly robust, but the risk around it and the alternatives, well, we didn't have a better option, so hence we proceeded with it. The risk of fraud still exists. It's not necessarily the best system. Online voting can provide some improvement. The risk exists around that as well. But do we want to stick in the Stone Age, revert to voting booths, stay with postal votes? We know that don't have a future. We know that we're increasingly moving to online. Do we want to be seen to be a future and forward-thinking council, or do you want to sit in our hands and not participate? My preference is to participate. I will be voting in favour of this paper. There's no guarantee we'll be selected to participate in the trial, but I think that if we are selected, we'll do a good job and it'll benefit Wellingtonians.
Thank you. Seconding Councillor Lee, and then Councillor Ahapini Mercer after that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very happy to second this motion. This is a trial. It is about showing leadership. This is not a new concept. And it is not going to be 100% fail-safe. Yes, there will be a risk of hacking, but hacking is actually electoral fraud. So people are not going to do this for kicks. I appreciate that there are some members who are concerned about the risk. There is always fear of the unknown, and change does scare people. We are heading into a digital age. We have online banking. Earlier, we had a public speaker, I think it was Daniel, who was saying that online banking, there is risk, there is fraud, and the banks wear it. But do the banks really wear it? I'm sure it's passed on to its members. We have online sales, we have emails. So it is about balancing risk with the benefits of a new system. We're in a digital age. This is actually a trial. So a trial, we look at what the issues are, we test it, and then we improve upon it. It is a system which complements our current paper-based system. If you look at the current paper-based system, we get a voting ballot in the paper, in the letterbox. Someone marks it. We assume that it's the rightful owner. It's sent off. We assume that it actually gets to its final destination, and it's tallied up. I think this system is the way of the future, and we do have to embrace it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ahapini Mercer.
I'm very clear, Your Worship, this morning that there is only one issue, and that is the issue of risk. I don't think we will hear anybody mounting arguments to do with buy-in, participation, or is the principle of it no good? No, it's all about the risk. And there we will have a different range of views. Justin has given a useful synopsis of his own on it. And before I get into where I stand on this, I want to acknowledge some of those submitters that were quite concerned about the risk, acknowledge the fact that they have reminded us that no system is foolproof, if you like. They may not have used those words, but no system is foolproof. So it comes back to, as in the case of driving a car, and that's not to trivialise in any way this issue, considering risk, and do you want to participate, i.e. grab hold of a steering wheel, cross a road, live outside of your own house, or stay in a tent like Michael Jackson did. And again, it's about risk. I have sufficient confidence that the risk is manageable. I do not need to go into the dissertations of the various commentators, submitters and legal advisors who gave their particular view on their background, their basis of where they're coming from. Do I have sufficient confidence? Lying this on the table, and there has been some talk, and I understand that process, is a kick for touch. We're not here to abrogate responsibility on this. We're either yes or no. Let's do it. Let's vote on it today, not put it off and ask officers to come and organise 1,000 workshops and IT consultants and go round and round and round, and I know that's the picture I'm particularly painting. So do I have sufficient confidence that this can proceed? I do. I will be supporting the online trial.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, I'll give you the order I've got people in at the moment. Councillor Young, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Panic, Councillor Eagle, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought it would be interesting to have a look to see where New Zealand had led the world in technology, and I hadn't realised that a New Zealander invented the egg beater. I know we invented things like disposable syringes, and of course concrete mixing trucks. But we do have a proven record of embracing modernity and technological advance. And these days I do pretty much all my banking online, I do some shopping online, and people are posting fewer and fewer letters so that post boxes are being removed, as the Mayor of Pororua mentioned this morning. I've also, in the past 24 hours, had earfuls from people who know far more than I do about computers and talking about the risks of about data, about coding, and I know there are big concerns about this. And I also know that technology can be frightening. We laugh now at photographs of people walking in front of cars waving red flags, although the way some people drive, that's probably quite a good idea. But Wellingtonians are very proud of being the most educated people in New Zealand. We think we're the cleverest and the most switched on of citizens. So you'd think e-voting or online voting would be embraced by all. But of course, people are always fearful of change. This is only a trial. It is not hardwiring it for perpetuity. And as has been pointed out, we may not be accepted. The trial may not even go ahead. Frankly, I love the tradition of going to a polling booth and putting my mark against me nowadays. But just in case there's any doubt. But we've had emails from the Disability Rights Commissioner. We've had a lot of contact from people with vision problems, and there's no doubt. And I have a nephew who has muscular dystrophy. I know the problems that people with physical handicaps have with traditional voting. So I have listened this morning with great interest. I know I texted Justin at one stage this morning saying I'm going to change my vote, but then the more I listened, the more I thought about it. I thought this is a trial. Electoral fraud is always a risk, but so is the relatively unpoliced postal voting system. I live in an apartment block. Every election there is a pile of envelopes with voting papers of people who have moved out. You'll be pleased to know that I leave them in a pile to go back to the electoral office. But this is an enormous temptation. This is a huge potential for abuse. And we are... What? No, it's obvious you've got voting things there. I wouldn't do it because, I like to hold my office if I get elected, not end up in what was Mount Crawford, and I don't know where people go nowadays. Probably for me. Anyway, online voting will make it easier for people to vote. We have steadily decreasing numbers of people who exercise a right for which many people have died. It's interesting that on Saturday it is Women's Suffrage Day, 122 years since women got the vote in New Zealand. It is a real concern that people don't vote, or that some people post their votes but don't allow enough time, and that's becoming a bigger problem with decreased numbers of deliveries. So every year, fewer and fewer people are voting. We have to do something to arrest this. I believe it is a very good idea to support this trial, to encourage people to exercise the democratic right. I will be voting in support of the trial.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ritchie.
Councillors, I presume I've only got 3 minutes, or is that long? First of all, I want to make it very clear to Council that I entered this process with an open mind and was of a mind to support it originally. But, very briefly, DIA said there should be meaningful dialogue with our constituents. That has not happened. We've heard some very valuable contributions today from some people who have significant expertise, far greater with respect than that which is in our council report. It is also, and it has to be made clear, that this is not a trial. It is a binding process for the next election in 2016 if we opt in. It is not a trial, and I find it really poor that we have been misled to believe that what we are voting on is a trial. The fourth point I want to make by way of introduction is around the issue of risk. This is not around only the issue of risk. It is around the issue of risk to democracy and risk of trust in democracy and in those who are elected and those institutions, whether they be council or parliament as well. It is not about banking or shopping. If there is a failure in banking in one way or another, that can be rectified. If there is a failure in an election of any kind, it is very unclear as to how that would be rectified. Perhaps by another election or perhaps by some other process, but that hasn't been shared with us. So what is the evidence? The council report is so thin that it doesn't give us any confidence in anything. It doesn't tell us anything. No country has been successful in introducing this. We have heard that. We have been given the example of Estonia, but I have information that only 25% of people in Estonia contributed to the online voting, so that even that is not evidence. There has been challenge, and I don't apologise to the Mayor of Porirua for suggesting that some of us, which was the implication, might live in the Stone Age or might be reluctant to change. Let me put my record on the table. First of all, I was elected citywide. Secondly, I was elected originally by a booth process. Thirdly, when it was possible to have ward and postal voting, I thought it would be a good idea to change at that time in order to increase the participation. And so this council adopted the motion that I proposed at that time. I do not have that confidence now in postal voting whatsoever, given the figures. So the risks are to democracy, to anonymity, the possibility of hacking, and, you know, the US military can't give the kind of confidence that Councillor Ahipeni-Musa seems to have. It is binding, it is not a pilot, it is not a trial. The process related to the RFP I thought was very interesting, that there should be an open process and that the criteria should be clearly established. We have no idea what they might be. We have no idea what the mitigation processes might be for fraud or failure. And to talk about people who are tech savvy, when we know around the council table that we don't even have the tech, let alone the savvy, you know, is somewhat ironical today. We have a failing computer system for councillors at present. Auckland, too risky to trial, as one councillor has already said. And finally, I just want to suggest and ask, and I don't know how we could do this, but it does seem to me that a booth process, a one-day, I personally, I don't know how other councillors feel or the public, the 3-week election.
Councillor, these are, A, you've run out of time, B, these are not matters. The booth and the voting period are not matters under consideration. I would like you to sit down now, thank you.
Could I have an extension, please? For
No, you've already had one. You may not have noticed it, but you have already had one.
What if I could just round off my...
Only in terms of the decision today, not in terms of other items.
And that was my question around booth voting. What I want to say is, just to quote the Australian experience, and the quote was that this would be, for Australia, where there is mandatory voting, a catastrophic risk to democracy. And that's what we are discussing today. Thank you. I won't be supporting the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. We now move to Councillor Pannett.
Thank you. I also won't be supporting this. I accept that this is well-intentioned, but I don't believe it's been thought through, and this is exemplified very clearly in our paper, which only lists a few advantages and no disadvantages. The issues around security and international experience should have been covered and haven't been, and unfortunately I find that that has very much undermined my confidence in the advice that we have been given. Councillor Ritchie is correct to have pointed that out, that it is not a trial, it is the real deal. There will be the potential for corruption in our elections next year if we are accepted for this trial. I am someone who is wedded to my cell phone, but I also do believe that too much of our information is online, and there actually has to be a space at which we say no. There is too much potential for fraud. I think what the critical issue really here is whether New Zealand can deliver where other countries haven't. And I think the answers that we received from some of our experts were not compelling to me. This is not new. It has been tried and they have failed, including in the Netherlands, which of course is a very, very progressive country. The thing about being resourced adequately is an absolute issue because we don't actually have that much money, and I can just hear the corners being cut because there's always issues around budget. The integrity of our voting system is absolutely paramount. It goes above everything else. I have read the working group report, which was sent to us yesterday, but I did read it. Unfortunately, sent by the Deputy Mayor, it actually doesn't, it provides the contrary evidence why we shouldn't be supporting it. There is no evidence to suggest that it increases participation, and the examples that it gives of overseas experience have now been shown to have failed. So this was a difficult report for me to read. The other thing which it says too, of course, is that the security just needs to be, and quoted, secure enough. From my point of view, that's not good enough. The standard of security has to be almost absolute, and the fact that we are only hearing about balancing risk does not give me confidence at all. Yes, governments and business are improving in their use of technology, but so are the criminals and so are the hackers. So whenever there is an advance in the legitimate world, legally, there will always be someone coming in to undermine you. And it's quite true. We do deal with millions of dollars of contracts. There is actually some power in this city. There is actually incentive for some people to be able to undermine us. This essentially is a large amount of cost, not just financial, but in terms of a threat to our democracy for what is essentially a convenience tool. There is absolutely no evidence to show that it's going to increase the participation. It's just going to make it easier for people who are already going to vote. And it's been pointed out to me that young Green voters might be very keen on this particular way of voting, but that is not a good enough reason for supporting that. No, and in fact I find such a suggestion almost repugnant. It is about the integrity of our voting system. And I guess the thing is that basically all you've got is a tool that's not going to fix the problem. The reason that the participation rates continues to decline is not because people don't have e-voting, it's because they don't trust us. The cynicism of in our political system and right across the Western world is at an all-time low. It is our job to do our jobs better, probably. In terms of the disability, just nearly finished, look, you know, some of you will know that I was the champion for accessibility issues for 6 years, and so obviously I take it seriously that I'm going to vote against the people who have made very strong representation that we need to do the trial. But, you know, you heard my questions to Mr. Bryan. There are alternatives, and the fact that there are advantages to that community doesn't outweigh the risk to the integrity of our system. Lastly, I hope that the people who support this will be accountable. It won't be just seen as a learning if we have to shut the system down within 48 hours, that people will take acceptance for compromising the most important system we have of all.
Thank you, Councillor. Move to Councillor Eagle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I want to just start by saying it looks on the from the outset an attractive proposition, and it will address a number of the issues that we've talked about. But I do need to caution you and say that those who have spoken about this not being a trial are quite correct. It's certainly a pilot. It's the government's trial. It's our pilot. I would be saying to the providers, if you want to run a trial, you build the system and then you run it on that, pre-doing it in the real environment. And that's a risk that can be saved from us. I'm trying not to repeat what others have said, but one of the, I guess a question that came to mind, and it's only a question that we can answer around this table, is what does accepted failure look like? Is it one vote that goes missing, 1,000 or 100,000? I don't know. I would say nothing. But that's something you have to be sure about when you make the decision today. I also want to focus on other matters too that I don't think have been talked about, but there's a reputational risk here. If we get this wrong, this forever stains the city's reputation. We are the city that had the failure, that got it wrong, and you may say that's doom and gloom. I'm being a good governor in terms of looking at the risks and saying, what are we doing about them? I think there is a risk there and something should be done. I also think that the biggest issue for me is that I get the sense that we are saying in some sense that people are lazy and this will make them vote. Now, it's not the silver bullet, but I think that's wrong, and we need to take the responsibility around people's disengagement, their disconnection and their despair with anything that's termed democracy or the democratic process. That's where I think the main issue is. I don't think it's a comms plan to fix it, because people perceive that now as spin. It's not the real deal. So that mistrust, what Councillor Pannett talked about, that lack of confidence, it can be resolved because we even heard from the provider that actually we have the opportunity, and I'm leading a piece of work around a social strategy. Within that, we could put civics and education in there. I'm not saying we have to do it, but in terms of leading the city, if we are savvy, if we are wealthy, if we're more intelligent than anywhere else in New Zealand, then that's something that we could utilise and address some of the issues where we had members of the public come to the table and say, look, I'm blind, I'm disabled, I'm a young person. I mean, this should all be happening anyway. What we do is we wait for the orange man to pop out, and that becomes our comms plan. This could be integrated much more into everyday society and could be part of our work program much earlier on. But we don't do that. And that's why we never went out to consult like Pororua did, and I admire the Mayor coming in. But we didn't do that. We didn't have the conversation. He did. He had a clear process. He can be confident standing up there saying, this is what my people want. I'm clear, I'm confident, I've been part of the team, part of the trial, and that's why he's able to come in here today with a big smile on his face and say, let's do it. I don't think we can. I'm not opposed to it in principle. I am wrapping up. But today is not the time, and I can't support it. There's too many things that I haven't got answers to. But as they say, the power is in your hands, but today it's in our hands.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marsh, Peck and Free.
Thank you, Worship. Well, when the paper was introduced, the Deputy Mayor said, is it we're not going to do anything, or are we going to do something? But I think there is another option. It's not to do something, but do something next time. We don't have to do it now necessarily. You know, in 3 years' time, we could be sitting in exactly the same position. Other councils will have gone out and have tried online voting, and let's hope it works. But then we can say, great, we have got much more faith in this system, so let's adopt it as well. You know, it's only 3 years, and to do something in 3 years' time seems to be not a difficult situation to put ourselves in. Using words like Stone Age, lack of forward thinking, fearful of change, that's really marginalising the councillors who may be a little bit more conscious of security than some of the others. And I think that's rather unfair. You know, I agree that online voting is a way of the future. We use online banking, we use all sorts of things. But did you jump into online banking straight away? I think that it's the sort of thing that you take a little time to accept. You see that other people are using it and there's a level of security. And so then you may well adopt it. And I think that's the same sort of thing. The word trial, that's been brought up a number of times. It's not a trial, it's the real thing. And it's the way we assess our own level of risk, whether you go and buy shares in a particular company or you don't. It depends where you are comfortable with your level of risk. Pororua and some of the other councils are comfortable with the level of risk, but perhaps we are not. That's what we have to judge. And I'll leave you with one last thought. You've mentioned that we are a tech leader, but you don't have to be first to be a leader.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Peck.
Thanks, Madam Mayor.
It's an interesting issue we have to look at today, and I'm probably
across the table.
I'm probably known as probably the tech Luddite in the council. I find the iPad difficult to use, and the laptop even worse. But so the only thing I use is my cell phone, but I do use that, and I use my computer at home, my PC at home, because I know how to use that. But so I don't hardly call myself a tech savvy person, but I tend to know when something's inevitable, and this is actually inevitable. It's going to happen, and we're in a position where we can be part of leading what's going to happen, or we can be a follower. And I would have thought Wellington was better than that, actually, frankly. I thought Wellington should be capable of being a leader rather than a follower, and I'll be supporting the resolution. I just want to disabuse those that think that paper-based processes where the citizen fronts up and that sort of thing are in any way at all the best in the world. And I want to ask you to remember two people. There was a guy called Reg Borman and a guy called Norman Douglas. Now, nobody knows about them because they got defeated not by the ballot box but by the courts, by two characters called Wyatt Creech and Winston Peters. Everybody's heard of Wyatt Creech and Winston Peters because they won their elections in court. They won their elections because of electoral I'm not going to call it fraud because it wasn't fraud, it was ticks and crosses. That's what it was, ticks and crosses on ballot papers, and the judge had to make a decision about whether or not the intention of the voter was clear. So two people lost their political careers because of ticks and crosses. Now, paper-based systems have that particular problem, and we've heard enough from others about the potential for misusing the system through mail. Yeah, it can happen. I actually had my staff during the election time asking me how they should vote. They brought in their voting papers so they could ask me how they should vote. I want to tell you, a bit like Councillor Young, I refused to tell him. I said, go away and do some research and then make your vote, because I take that stuff actually really, really seriously. And let's just have a look at what other case. Who's going to say that the citizens of Florida got justice with the Chads? This is a system which used you punch a button and out comes your voting paper. Hello, and some of the Chads didn't drop off, and so all of a sudden a presidential election got compromised because the people of Florida didn't have their votes counted. Let's not get dewy-eyed about wonderful paper systems producing a result that's fair. I would imagine that if you want to look at any election we've ever held in this country, the potential for someone to take something to court about the way the voting has been handled and the way counting has been done is very, very real indeed. And in the long term, the ability of an online system to get it right, I have far more confidence in that than others. I have a friend who is a professional hacker. It's his job to hack into people's websites to find out their security problems. He gets paid big money to do this. He tells me that online voting can be hacked for tens of dollars, not big money, tens of dollars. It's not going to take a lot to do it, but he says, why would anyone want to bother? You will need to be able to do it efficiently, about 20 to 30,000 people hacking to change a result of an election, because you might only be able to affect the vote of one person. What's the biggest risk to those of us around this table? Hello, somebody might find out that I didn't vote for Nicola Young for mayor. You know what? I can live with that. I could live with that. Not a problem. No. Well, one of the things that Councillor Young and I both know is we're not going to vote for each other. So there's no particular problem in that respect. But that's the biggest risk to anybody voting, is their voting intention might actually be disclosed. That would be a shame, and it would be embarrassing for the person concerned, but it's not a reason not to actually strike a blow for doing something new and giving our citizens an alternative to the methods of voting, which, quite frankly, they're very bored with.
Thank you. I've just got Councillor Free, Councillor Coghlan, and then myself and right to reply, or Councillor Foster, myself, right to reply.
Well, like many of you, I thought that this looked like a good idea, and I was thinking, well, what's there not to like about electronic voting? And to my surprise, it was people in the tech industry who first actually came to me and said there are some major issues here with the security. You really need to think hard about this. And also people who know a lot about local government and elections expressed their concerns. I take quite a lot of offence at the way this process has been run. Today, I was actually meant to be with my grandfather's medals, great-grandfather, was actually meant to be at a ceremony to commemorate the end of the Malaya War up at the cenotaph, and I'm really sorry that I can't be there, because I don't think that we should have had this conducted at an extraordinary council meeting without access to really good information, or access to information at the last minute, without a lot of people actually being able to be here and submit. Thank you to those of you who did come. It's not felt like a very good process for something that's meant to be the most fundamental thing about our democracy, which is how we run an election. It's not a trial. It actually is, for us at Wellington City Council, part of a binding result. And Louise Upston said in regard to this trial, she said, nothing can be 100% safe, which is why we're doing a trial in the first place. We'll do a trial, see if there are any issues, then you have the ability to say, well, no, it's still risky. Or we've covered off the risks, so we'll proceed further. So in other words, as one of my colleagues said, I think it was Councillor Eagle, this is the government's trial for what looks very much like what they want to eventually be able to do with the central election. But actually it's their trial, but it's our reality. This is what we are doing if we go ahead for our 2016 election. And I don't usually agree with Councillor Marsh on some things, but I actually do agree with him on this. Why should we be the guinea pigs for what the government wants as a trial to see how e-voting works for them? Especially when they're also asking us to pay $100,000 for the purpose. And when we get to that, $100,000 isn't huge in our budget, but we haven't actually budgeted this money. And you've got to think, we always talk about vanity projects. Is this a vanity project because we want to be seen as progressive? Yes. Smart capital. I've heard it around this table. Wellington leads the way. I've heard this rhetoric. But, you know, actually that $100,000, if you think about it in cold hard blood, it could actually buy a lot of other things, a lot of community centre hours, a lot of park ranger time, a lot of water fountains, a lot of bikes and school programs, or even enclosed dog parks. So, you know, it's not about the money, but actually the money is one of the aspects. I'm most concerned really about two things, the security obviously, but also about the stated intent, which is to increase voter participation. Now, I think that's disingenuous because I actually think what's really going on here is a trial for other purposes. But if we just look at the security issue, it is a concern to me that people that I respect in the IT community have been emailing me and even meeting me for coffee to talk about their real concerns.
Councillor, you have an extension, but please, you're not meant to be reading a speech.
I'm not reading a speech, I've got notes.
You've got some notes, good.
Look, it is a concern to me that the Australian Parliamentary Inquiry talks about catastrophically compromising the electoral process. It is a concern to me that we're hearing from people who know that this hasn't been trialled successfully for a central government election or even really for a local government election. It's really a concern to me that the Netherlands have banned it. I accept that perhaps technology will one day advance to the point where it can be done successfully, but while there can be fraud with paper voting, it's going to be on a small localised scale. This actually opens up to international criminals who knows if they're interested, but we don't know that they're not interested, and on a very much larger scale. Another thing, though, is about the stated goal of increasing participation, and I don't think it will. The evidence is actually that it doesn't. Voters are disengaged. I know when we meet them in the streets or door knock, it's for a variety of reasons. It's often because they're transient or they're disengaged, they don't trust the process, they don't see why they should vote, they're short of time, or a variety of reasons that I'm not sure this is actually going to address. So I can't support this. I'd like to. I do feel for the disability community. We'd like to do what we can, obviously, to improve things for you. But just at the moment, I can't support this. I wish I could say otherwise, but that's my position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I think today is all about really either we get on board with this and we do it or we don't. Look, our lives are increasingly online. I mean, we bank online, we do all our business online. We don't even use the jolly phone book anymore. We get online to look up phone numbers. So, we know that online voting in New Zealand already happens every day. Warwick gave some good examples and clearly outlined the wide range of elections that he's been responsible for many, many organisations across many, many sectors. So, they seem to be currently working pretty well, and obviously we know that there are risks and that they have to be identified and they have to be mitigated. And that happens now already for all of those different elections that he was talking about, and so would be the case for local government voting as well. Look, 7 councils have already signed up, and I personally think we should as well. I haven't really heard anything today that suggests that we shouldn't take part in a trial. There are no guarantees with any system, but how are we going to know unless we give it a go? I feel that it is really all about risk at the end of the day, and I feel confident that the risks will be identified and mitigated accordingly. There's been some discussion about why would New Zealand be better at this than anything else, any other country. Well, I mean, we've demonstrated on the world stage in a number of cases that we have managed to do things pretty well. I also think it is important about accessibility, increasing accessibility for people. It's important about voter participation, and I think it will probably help with that. What else? And I'm sort of confused actually. I'm quite surprised that, for example, some of our more green councillors would be so find this so appalling, because obviously there are real issues around sustainability with e-voting, which I think we need to consider as well. So it's obviously going to be better for the environment ultimately. So I think, and that I'm very concerned about that. So I think possibly where people are a little bit allergic to this is potentially with the process, that perhaps there could have been some more engagement, and that might have been helpful, but there actually hasn't been. And I think in this case, I'm happy to vote in support of the paper. Look, I just think we're so immersed in the online world now in every other facet of our lives that I really can't understand why we wouldn't be able to vote online as well potentially. So I think we should take part in the trial. Thank you.
Councillor Foster, Councillor Sparrow, myself in right of reply.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, when this came somewhat out of the blue, I looked at this and thought, oh yeah, I'm not too worried about this one either way. My inclination is to support it because it looks, like a progressive thing to do. But it's been really interesting to get the sort of feedback we've had, particularly from the technologically savvy parts or some of the submitters we've had, and some of the stuff we've had over the internet and the email, and that's made me question what we're thinking about. So clearly this is about, it might make it easier to vote. It clearly potentially overcomes some of the issues that, for example, Thomas Bryan talked to us before. I've had a look online and seen what, who's doing it internationally. Clearly what we're hearing is that there are a number of organisations around New Zealand who are engaging with this, but not at a government or local government level. And if you look around the world, it doesn't appear that there are a whole lot of candidates for that. So Estonia is the one which has been talked about quite a bit, and it looks to me that something between 25 and 30% of the Estonian people are now voting online, which means obviously something like 70% are not at the moment. But it's really interesting to have a look at a review which has been done of their system, and it says, if I may quote from this, Estonia is the only country in the world which relies on internet voting in a significant way for legally binding national referendums. Up to 25% of their voters cast ballots online. This makes the security of Estonia's system of interest to technologists and voters the world over. And what they've said there, they've done a review of it, and they said what we found alarmed us. There were staggering gaps in procedural and operational security, and the architecture of the system leaves it open to cyber attacks from foreign powers such as Russia, etc., who I would imagine could be quite interested in doing something like that with Estonia. I wouldn't put that past them for a moment. But it's really interesting to see that, and obviously also the Netherlands has backed out of doing it, and so we're not seeing a lot of government-level organisations saying, or government-level or local government level around the world saying we want to be into this, or in fact some of them are backing out of it. So they're clearly seeing that risk is a significant point. Look, I take the point about reputation that the Deputy Mayor mentioned and being tech savvy, but the key thing is its reality is more important to us than image. And if there are issues with this, we need them either nailed down properly and we'll be less worried about the image issues there. Councillor Peck mentioned it being inevitable going here. Well, if it was inevitable, I think we'd be seeing a whole lot more government agencies doing this. At the moment, they're not. So that says a lot of them are saying, well, yeah, but. And so they're not bailing into this or piling into this at the moment. And we're not seeing it in a governmental level all around the world. I take absolutely the points that have been made about a paper-based system not being secure or perfect, but on the other hand, I think the ability for mass fraud, invisible fraud and distant fraud is a lot smaller with something that is paper-based than it is with something that is technology-based, and we've certainly had evidence about that. I agree also with the points that have been made about the trial being interesting. This is not a trial, this is an actuality. The result count. This is not a pre-season match, it is a season match. You're playing for points. This is for real. It's the skydiving for real, not the pre-dive practice, if you might want to put it that way. I agree also with the points that have been made about the process to get here, to have an extraordinary paper, a thin paper, to have to be asking questions at the council meeting itself and to have had no engagement. None of those are particularly good processes, Madam Mayor, and I think we should have done this considerably better than we have. And the final point I wanted to make is that of the amount of money. It's a relatively small amount of money, but I can remember, and Ray's not here because he was the one who particularly pointed that out, at the time when a small amount of money was going to be added to our OPEX budget, or a small OPEX effect was going to be had at the end of our LTP process, and we all went ballistic about it, or many people went ballistic, because I was the one that raised it. I wanted to put a little bit more money in for some environmental purposes, and people went utterly ballistic. Why? Because it put us just that tiny bit over our cap. What is the difference now when we bring it in later on? I don't understand that. So I'm not terribly pleased with the process with that either. And Mr. Chief Executive, if it was being considered at the time of the LTP, it should have been put up there and we could have considered it at the time. And of course, that would have meant something else would have had to go. And of course, we've got no advice on this. So look, I think it sounds like a good idea, but, and I think the buts for me are just a little bit too great. I would rather be leading edge, not bleeding edge on this. And I think we're probably into the bleeding edge territory on this one.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sparrow.
I'd just like to say that at this late stage, I think we have all made up our minds on the issue. We have heard all the arguments for and against, and realistically, as I'm not sure that I have anything to say that hasn't already been said, I won't. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sparrow. What intelligence. I will endeavour to say some slightly different things. First of all, participation. Unfortunately, people have forgotten that actually it did go up in Wellington City in the last election. It went up by 2%. So there are some things that we are doing in this city that do help. Secondly, when we wanted input on our long-term plan, did we actually post out things to every household and expect them to write in, and was that all we did? No, we used the web to get more participation. So if we get more participation when we're consulting on the different things that we might or might not do, whether it's the airport extension, whether it's issues of which areas should be smoke-free or not, we seem to think that putting things online and on the website is a good way to get more people. Then to suddenly say, oh, but online voting won't make any difference at all, does seem a little odd. And I look forward to people who put that point forward, saying let's not worry about doing anything online with our website. Secondly, the point about integrity of the system is hugely important, but it's not perfect. Now, I think that's good. I think that's clear. That people are being really clear about that, and people have been really clear that for us it is a pilot, it is a real vote in a real election for real candidates. So that's been clear. The issue of consultation, the Department of Internal Affairs has actually consulted. I talked to Mayor Leggett, who's on the working party. They consulted extensively, and for basically every IT expert that says it can be hacked, there's other IT experts that say the security is reasonably good. And it is a co-evolution. As new mechanisms come on for security, there's other ways of getting around them. But let's remember, this is one-time password, one-time user ID. It's not the same, as, let's say, the Mayor's email system, and I change my password regularly. And as far as I know, nobody's been hacking that, although I do sometimes wonder when I read the Dominion Post. And the postal vote, you talk a little bit about why has it not happened anywhere else. Those were the reasons why we weren't going to move to STV. Those were the reasons why the Maori people weren't going to get the vote. Those were the reasons why we weren't going to give women the vote, presumably, because we would, gosh, have been the first. Well, I say it's about time the capital stood up and said that we should be inclusive. Please remember, it is an option. It is not compulsory. Let's give it a go. Let's make sure we ask DIA all of the questions, all of the things that we're concerned about. It will be a decision in December as to whether anybody can go ahead with this. I would like us to be part of the trial, not say, oh, well, it doesn't matter for Matamata Piako, it doesn't matter for Pororua, but we're not willing to put our political necks on the line. I don't think that's quite fair, with respect, Councillor Marsh, saying, let's watch other people do it and we won't be willing to participate. So I'll move to Councillor Lester for right of reply. And save your 6 minutes, 19 seconds of your life.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for right of reply. I won't canvass the issues raised, which most councillors have spoke to, except to say, and I want to comment on Councillor Marsh's words, which I think were very sage. And I had a conversation with Councillor Marsh yesterday to see where he sat on this, and I completely respect those that don't want to proceed with the trial. I think that's a legitimate rationale, and I can see, for me, I'm not actually that far different, but I think on the balance of probabilities, we're not actually as vulnerable as we think. The benefits outweigh the negatives. With the benefits we've talked about around accessibility, around encouraging voter participation, the trending downwards of postal voting, the future likelihood that there may not be posties, that we may not have mailboxes, that we might not have regular delivery of postal mail. There will be change in the future. It's a question of when it will come to Wellington. The trial will take place. We've already got confirmed interest from another of councils around the country. I believe that, given that the trial is already taking place, that Wellington should express its interest, and if selected by the government, we should also proceed. But I respect the opinions of others who don't wish to do so, and there will be a future opportunity should we not go ahead. So we're not going to die in a ditch about this. It's a question of where you sit. I'll encourage those councillors to vote for it. I've already stated that I will be, and I look forward to, if the opportunity does arise, being part of the process.
Now take the vote. I declare it carried. Thank you. And that closes the council meeting. Just check your votes in case there was a bug lurking in that board over there. You don't want to find that you got it wrong. Thank you. Councillor Eagle, thank you for allowing us to override your community sport and recreation. Would you like to reconvene in 5 minutes? Great.